This is Kathy Gust. It's my turn to host. Welcome to Silicon Web Costumers Guild Presents. This particular episode is inside the International Costumers Guild Press, and the speaker will be Philip Gust, the current editor of the press. The webinar series offers talks by speakers on a variety of topics, which we hope will be of interest to costumers. They are free to Silicon Web members. They may also be made available to the greater costuming community on a space available basis. To send feedback or suggestions for future speakers or topics that might be of interest, please contact us at webinars@siwcostumers.org. The chapter would also like to acknowledge the International Costumers Guild Marty Year Costuming Arts and Sciences Fund for a grant they made in support of developing this series, and to acknowledge the International Costumers Guild for making the Zoom platform available to us. Please leave your audio and video controls on mute, but feel free to chat and react in the chat window. If you'd like to toggle between the slides and the speaker, you can use the view control to toggle back and forth. Usually that control can be found on the upper left of your screen. There will be a Q&A period after the presentation. To ask a question, type it into the chat window. Somebody will be monitoring and capturing the questions so that the speaker can answer them. And when the webinar is over, please complete a survey on your experience. The International Costumers Guild Press is a new publication arm for the ICG. Current press editor-in-chief is Philip Gust, and he will be talking about the press today, its purpose, how it works, and some recently published and upcoming books. This is your chance to find out what goes on behind the scenes, how books are published and developed, and if you are interested in publishing a book in a long form or short form that you believe would be a benefit to the costuming community, please feel free to contact him about your idea. Philip Gust enjoys science fiction and fantasy costuming. He has particular interest in props, special effects, and prosthetic makeup. He also costumes in some historical periods, including Regency, Victorian, and early 20th century. He's the current editor-in-chief of the ICG Press. He also chairs the Publications Committee and the Technology Committee, and he is the ICG Webmaster. As a member of the Silicon Web Costumers Guild chapter, Phil is the editor of the chapter's Virtual Costumer quarterly online magazine, and he is the usual host of Silicon Web Costumers Guild Presents this webinar series. Take it away, Phil.
Well, thank you very much, Kathy. This is an unusual position to be in, the host actually presenting, but I'm happy to be here. Today, we're going to be talking about inside the International Costumers Guild Press, as Kathy said, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the press. The International Costumers Guild Press is a publication arm of the nonprofit International Costumers Guild. Our mission is to publish long-form content, including books and monographs on topics related to costumes and costuming. And the ICG Press serves ICG's mission as a nonprofit educational organization. I originally proposed the ICG Press in 2017 as president of the ICG as a way to promote ICG's growth and also to extend its educational mission. Many professional societies and some nonprofits publish books that support their educational missions. And I thought it would be a good idea for the ICG at its stage of development to do that too. It was adopted by the board as Standing Rule 33. We had a member with a lot of experience in book publication who was eager to actually help start the press. And unfortunately, soon after it was approved by the board, she was unable to continue doing that. So the press actually went dormant for several years after that. The impetus to restart the project was actually Leslie Johnston, Jill Eastlake, and Judy Mitchell's project for a new edition of the Masquerade Handbook. I began investigating the possibility of doing that in mid-2024. And I showed that the small press publishing industry had become sufficiently mature that it became feasible and affordable for us to actually do that. In the fall of 2024, the ICG board appointed me as the founding editor-in-chief to restart the press. I began working with two existing ICG assets in order to gain experience with the book publishing process. When Leslie turned over the project for the Masquerade Handbook to me in late 2024, I added that to the publication schedule as well. In all, we've published 3 titles as of spring 2025. The ICG Masquerade Guidelines, the 2021 edition in January, Myrtle R. Douglas, Mother of Convention Costuming, also in January, and the Masquerade Handbook, 2nd edition, which will be coming out March 15th, this next week. And here are images of the covers for all 3 of those books. We'll be looking at some of those in more detail later. So I want to talk about the operation of the ICG Press. The editor-in-chief oversees the operation of the press and also sets its policy. The editor-in-chief is appointed by the ICG board. There's also a selection committee that evaluates and recommends potential titles to the editor-in-chief, and the selection committee is appointed by the editor-in-chief. The editor-in-chief is also a member of the ICG Publications Committee. The ICG Press generally is meant to be financially self-sufficient based on retained earnings from sales of titles, and also occasional funds from the ICG and donations for one-time expenses, such as startup expenses. Here's a diagram that illustrates the relationship. The ICG board appoints the editor-in-chief. The editor-in-chief is a member of the publication committee, and the editor-in-chief appoints the selection committee. ICG Press is classified as a small press publisher in the industry. We operate independently. We're not an imprint of some other larger publisher. We're limited to specific topics and specific markets. We make our own editorial decisions. We provide our own editorial and pre-production services. And we have smaller output and relatively lower annual sales as a result of our operations than a larger publisher might. We rely on external production and distribution services for our work. We don't actually have any production and distribution services ourselves. We evaluated several companies that offer those services to small press publishers, and we selected Ingram Spark as our production and distribution partner. And the reasons are these. Full production services to small press publishers is what Ingram Spark is all about. They charge no cost to register and no cost to set up titles. That's a relatively new thing for them. They used to charge a fee for each title that they set up, and they changed their business model at the beginning of 2024. They provide automatic processes for digital submission of content, so that streamlines the process both for us and for them. They provide extensive tools, tutorials, and documentation for publishers and individual writers who want to publish through them. And that's a real benefit. You can learn a lot from going through their resources, and they do very well. They publish multiple formats as well: hardcover, paperback, and ebook. One of the things that they use to make this work is print-on-demand technology to reduce both cost and inventory. Because we don't have to actually publish a large run of a given title, the cost to us is actually minimal, and we actually don't have to order a large quantity that we have to keep in our garage or wherever we keep our inventory as well. So it's a real savings to be able to do print on demand. And one of the reasons you can do that is because small press publishers tend to have smaller runs than large publishers might, so they can afford to do print on demand economically. They also provide international distribution to online and brick and mortar sellers as well. So this is a good choice for the ICG Press. I want to talk a little bit about the steps for setting up the ICG Press as a publisher. We need to create a publisher email, websites, and social media. We need to create publisher accounts with Ingram Spark. We need to register as a publisher with the US Library of Congress, and we need to purchase ISBN identifiers for published titles. And I'll talk a little bit about each of those in turn. So in terms of creating the publisher email website media, I set up the ICG Press Editor at customer.org email address that we use for external communications, but more importantly, we also use it to register with other providers. So we don't have a personal email address used. We have a dedicated ICG Press email we can use to register. I also created the International Customers Guild Press section of the website, and we can look at that at the end of the talk if you like. I set the ICG Google group up for internal communications, both for administrative purposes and for the selection committee as well. This mirrors pretty much what the ICG does for the Marty Gear Costume Arts and Sciences Fund. One of the things that's left to do is to set up social media. For instance, the Facebook page. There are several kinds of Facebook pages, and it's just a matter of deciding what kind we want. The second is we need to create a publisher's account at Ingram Spark. I submitted our identifying information about the ICG Press to Ingram Spark, and I also set up accounts in conjunction with our treasurer for receiving payments for sales through PayPal. And I also set up accounts for paying services through our own bank account. One of the services we pay for example, is ordering proof copies of books. I also sent a question to the support group to test the responsiveness. It's something I do with almost all new vendors. They are pretty good about responding. It takes them 2 or 3 days to get back usually, so you can't pick up the phone and call them. They've changed their model since they also changed their financial model in the beginning of 2024. So there's no phone response or chat response available. But 2 or 3 days is not bad for what we need. We registered as a publisher with the US Library of Congress. The Library of Congress is the central clearinghouse for all books published in the US. They provide registration and cataloging for new titles as well. So one of the things that they do for new books is they assign what's called a Library of Congress control number, or LCCN, prior to publication. They use that to identify the title and also to link the different versions of the title that are published, ebook, hardcover, or softcover. Publisher is required to deposit a copy of the book once it's published with them. But other than that, there are no fees for any of these services that they do. The last thing we did was to purchase ISBN identifiers for the published titles. The International Standard Book Number, or ISBN, is a 13-digit book identifier. ISBNs are required by most sellers and also some buyers, for instance, libraries, need to have an ISBN in order to purchase the book. Publishers purchase ISBNs from an affiliate of the International ISBN Agency. Different ISBNs are assigned to each edition and each version. The ICG Press purchased 100 ISBNs from the US affiliate, R.R. Bowker. Here's the structure of an ISBN. It encodes a lot of information, such as what language the book is published in this case, English, who the registrant is, in this case, ICG Press, and what the publication was. This is the ISBN for the Masquerade Handbook, the paperback edition. And the last digit is a checksum, which is common on almost all accounts, including your checking account and your credit card account. So how do we select a title for publication? First, the editor-in-chief, when they receive a submission, determines whether it actually meets our general criteria. If it does, it gets passed on to the selection committee for evaluation of merits. The selection committee evaluates it and makes a recommendation to the editor-in-chief, who's then responsible for the final decision. There may be other considerations. For instance, if there are several books on the same topic, the editor-in-chief may decide that we don't need another one. If the recommendation is favorable, the editor-in-chief passes the project on to an editor who sees the title through the production process. This is pretty much what happens at all publishers, whether they're small press or large publishers. So here's a little diagram that shows how that works. You get the proposal, the editor-in-chief receives it, they pass it on for evaluation, the committee makes the recommendation, and if the decision is to publish, then it goes on to the publication process. Let's talk about the types of content because that affects the publication decision as well. Publishers classify books by the type of content, from no content, essentially an empty book, for instance, a blank notebook or a journal or a book for sketching. Low content has minimal text or prompts, and it's meant to be filled in by the users. So planners, diaries, logbooks, and so forth fall into that category. Mid content has more text and information, but it's still designed to be interactive with the reader and customizable. So workbooks, activity books, coloring books are all examples of mid-content books. High content, a lot of text, a lot of information, meant to be read cover to cover. Handbooks, monographs, bibliographies all fall into that category. Our primary focus in terms of publication is the high and some mid-content titles on topics related to costumes and costuming. These are the ones that best match our educational mission. And in fact, we're unable economically to publish low and no content titles just based on price. In terms of formats, our primary focus is hardback and softcover formats. We'll also publish ebook formats where it makes sense. One of the issues is that ebooks don't preserve the layout. They reflow the text based on the size of the screen or the reader. Certain fixed layout titles can't actually be produced as an ebook because reflowing would destroy the part of the value of the content. There are some contract issues right now with some ebook distributors, for instance, Amazon KDP and Apple Books, that are making it difficult for us to do that rather than going along with the normal terms and conditions of Ingram Spark. They insist that we sign on to their conditions in addition to Ingram Sparks. And so we've made a decision so far not to publish with Amazon KDP and Apple Books, but other vendors, for instance, Barnes and Noble, doesn't require any special treatment. They'll just allow us to publish through the normal process. So we at least have ebooks coming out through Barnes and Noble and a couple of other vendors as well. We are investigating distribution of PDF format directly for use on computers and tablets, and we'll see how that works. That would allow us to essentially publish any book we want in a PDF format that could be read on any device. So we're in our startup phase right now. The titles we selected were existing ICG assets or they were available to publish. And as a matter of fact, there are no selection committee in place, so there was no one to help select it. So this was a natural to choose those particular kinds of titles. So for this startup phase, I served as the editor for all three titles. It allowed me to focus on learning the book publication process, and believe me, there's a lot to learn. It allowed me to evaluate, document, and graphics tools as well, which ones would be best to use. In order to help minimize the work involved, I also developed a common set of layouts and styles that were applied to all three books. So they'll look quite a bit different if you actually look at the books, but underneath there's a common set of styles and layouts that made it much easier to publish all three books in succession. It'll also allow me to gain experience with cover design, which is an entire industry all by itself. I've never designed a cover, but now I've designed three. It also allowed us to delay issues like contracts and royalties. All of the books that we published were either existing ICG assets or the people who were involved in it were willing to let the ICG have the royalties for it. So they weren't asking any royalty fees. That would be the Masquerade Handbook. We're going to have to deal with that in the future as we get authors who are publishing with us. In terms of evaluating tools for document creation, there were three potential candidates. InDesign from Adobe, which is very expensive. It's a professional tool for creation of complex books and layouts, but for non-professionals, it's prohibitively expensive, and it has a relatively steep learning curve. Then there's Microsoft Word, which is moderately priced, supports moderately complex book layouts. It's not designed for books, but it can be made to work with experience. And the final one is actually free, LibreOffice Writer. It supports moderately complex book layouts, just like Microsoft Word does. And it's also not designed for books, but again, it can be made to work with experience. I finally selected Microsoft Word for these initial titles. First of all, I already use Microsoft Word and I have extensive experience using it. So that was an easy decision. It has sufficient features for these initial titles as well. It has actually a pretty good spelling and grammar checker built in, but even if it didn't, there are separate tools that I could use to plug into that, like Grammarly, that would allow us to check the grammar and check the spelling relatively easily. It produces PDF files that Ingram Spark can use. The titles are submitted to Ingram Spark as PDF files, and it's important that the kind of PDF files we produce can be used by Ingram Spark, and Microsoft Words can. The thing that finally decided between Word and LibreOffice was that the docx format used by Microsoft Word can be accepted by another tool called Calibre to create ebooks. So that decision was pretty easy because it had to work with another tool that worked with that format. So here's an example of the book as it's seen on the screen. And I've turned on all of the formatting options so that I can actually see the paragraph markers, the end of lines, section breaks, things like that. And I work with it that way because it's just much easier to do when layout actually matters. In terms of cover creation, I also evaluated several tools, and it's the usual list of suspects. Adobe InDesign, Ingram Spark generates cover templates for books when you ask them to, and they'll generate a cover template in InDesign format. So that would make it relatively easy to open in InDesign and then do the cover layout there. Again, it's expensive for non-professionals and there's a steep learning curve. Microsoft Word, Ingram Spark will also generate PDF cover templates that can be imported into Microsoft Word. The real negative is that Microsoft Word is limited in terms of the size of a file that it can open, which was a surprise to me. And a lot of the templates actually exceed the capability of Microsoft Word to open a template of that size. LibreOffice Draw, on the other hand, one of the other companion tools to LibreOffice Writer, Ingram, again, can generate PDF cover templates that can be imported by LibreOffice. The real advantage here is that LibreOffice doesn't have the same size limitations that Microsoft Word does. So it was really the only choice. It has more limited graphics and functions than InDesign and some of the other Adobe tools like Photoshop. But on the other hand, there's a lot of external tools that you can use to create the graphics and then import them into LibreOffice Draw. So this was an obvious choice to use. I selected LibreOffice Draw for the initial titles. I already have it. I already use it every day. I use the LibreOffice series to generate the files for the virtual customer. So I'm very familiar with it. It has sufficient features for the initial titles. It handles large cover templates, as I mentioned, and it produces PDF files that Ingram Spark can use. One of the online tools from Ingram Spark is a cover template generator. And what they want you to do is to actually lay out your cover design on top of this template. They provide a lot of information around the corners about the sizes and things like that. That blue area in the center with the pink on it is the area where they want you to put your template. The pink area is where they want your content, and the blue area is where they don't want your content. The blue area around the edges is where they actually trim the paper to the size of the book that you're publishing. So you shouldn't put content in there. The center pink area is where the spine goes. That's where you would put any of the lettering talking about who the author was, what the title is, and sometimes what the publisher is if you have room. They also put a ISBN barcode on the template because you had to give them that information to generate the template. At that point, you know exactly where the barcode ought to go. So let's look at what happens when you actually do a cover design on top of that. And there it is. You can see the registration marks, those plus signs. I'm going to switch back. You can see those plus signs around the edges of the blue. And what they want you to do is to make sure that your content fits pretty well within that. You can let your content flow outside of that, but it's going to get trimmed off. So you want your content to fit pretty well inside of that. You can see the vertical spine is there with the lettering on it. And then the left side is the back of the book and the right side is the front of the book. So if this were a hardcover book with a paper cover, you just unfold the paper cover and that's what it would look like. I can actually hide the graphic image that I selected for this cover art so that I can actually see the template underneath and make sure everything lines up. And then I show it again on a separate layer for publication purposes. A couple other tools that I use, Adobe Acrobat is used for processing the PDF book and cover files. Once you've actually created the PDF files from the book and the cover, you need to adjust the resolution of the PDF embedded images. You don't want the images to be too low resolution because they won't print nicely. And you don't want them to be too high resolution because if you do, then it takes a long time to print and they'll actually call you on it during the verification phase and ask you to reduce them. So in both cases, either increasing or decreasing, they'll ask you to make changes. So I use Acrobat to do that. I also transform the PDF embedded images from what's normally used on the screen, red, green, blue, to the color space used for printing, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. So the color space that's used for printing is different than the one that's used for the screen. And Ingram wants the print color space. So Adobe Acrobat can do that. And finally, I can actually edit the book cover and back to create the preview for the look inside feature that I'll use on the website. And I'll show you that later on. You can actually remove individual pages, rearrange them, and create annotations and things like that. So here's a flowchart that shows how that works. For the book, Microsoft Word exports the PDF file, and then you edit it with Adobe Acrobat and then save it, and you have the modified PDF book file, which is what you actually use to submit to Ingram Spark. And for LibreOffice Draw, again, you export the PDF cover, apply the Adobe Acrobat, and save it, and the modified PDF cover file is what you submit to Ingram. You take the original PDF book file, the images of the back cover and the front cover, and you bring them both into Acrobat. You remove the pages you don't want to be part of the preview. You add the front and back cover and another page that says, "Thank you for previewing this book. Please buy it." And out comes the preview PDF file that we use for the look inside feature on the website. The other tool is Calibre, which is a free tool that was written by one person and maintained by one person. It's used to generate, among other things, ebook documents. So you read the MS Word file directly, and it'll create what's called an EPUB document. EPUB is the format that's used for electronic books. You can export the EPUB document with the cover and table of contents, and then you upload the EPUB file to Ingram Spark and other publishing platforms. And here's the workflow for that. Again, the cover image, in this case, just the front cover. You import it, you generate the EPUB format. Sometimes it doesn't always work out. Translating formatted document like Microsoft Word into EPUB format, because of the reflow, sometimes you need to make a few adjustments. Built into Calibre is an editor that will allow you to actually go and edit the EPUB itself. And I had to use that in a couple of cases. It's optional, but it's available if you want it. So it's a very nice tool. And finally, you export the EPUB file, and that's what gets used when you're submitting the ebook to Ingram for publication or any other publisher. Here's an example of the reflowed book for the handbook. This is a view that's used for the tablet view. If it was for the iPhone or Android phone, then it would just be a single column and it might be somewhat narrower and a little bit more restricted, but nonetheless, it's still usable even on a phone. I've tried using it that way, although I'd much prefer using it on a tablet. Once you have the book itself, you need to actually register that book in a couple of different places. First of all, you remember we purchased ISBNs from Bowker. What that does is gives us a pool of ISBNs to use. You put all of the ISBNs for this particular title on the copyright page itself. So in this case, we've got the paperback edition, the hardcover edition, and the ebook edition. And we put all three ISBNs on the copyright page. We also put the ISBN barcode on the cover design itself. The other thing we do is request an LCCN from the Library of Congress. And we have to wait for that to come back before we can add it to the copyright page. So here is the copyright page for the Masquerade Handbook. And you can see there's the three ISBNs, and there's a Library of Congress control number as well. And on the back cover, we saw that before, but I'll just blow it up. This is where you actually put the ISBN. What you can do is just take an image off of the template file. And then once you've got everything there, you lay that image back over and make it align with the one on the template itself. Once you have the book ready to go and you have your modified files, you submit each version of the book to Ingram Spark. So the ebook, the hardcover, and the softcover edition are all treated as separate books. The difference is that for the softcover and hardcover editions, it has the same book file, but a different cover file because you need a different cover layout for the hardcover edition. You provide the information about the book, any metadata, such as the author, the publication date, number, things like that. You provide the pricing, and you provide seller discounts, and you provide whether or not you're willing to accept a return. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. Then you upload the PDF book and cover files using the automated submission process to Ingram Spark. They go through a verification phase, and what they're looking for are things like you didn't embed the fonts that you're using in the file. They have to be embedded. It's not in the CYMK color space. Your images are either too large or too small to produce a good result. And they'll go through a verification step, and they'll give you a detailed list of things that they want you to fix. And they'll even give you a PDF file of the book with those things they want you to fix highlighted, which is really nice to find those kind of things. Once you've gone through the process of making changes in your original work and then bringing them back through the process, and it goes through the verification stage, they'll tell you that they've verified the content. They'll generate a page proof for you. It may take a day or two to get back. And what they want you to do is to go through the page proof and review it and hopefully find any typos and anything that's not aligned correctly, images that are too fuzzy, any of those kinds of things. You won't always find everything. You may need to get a proof copy of the book before you'll see something that's wrong, but generally you'll find most of it in the page proof. If there is a problem, you go through that process again and generate another page proof. And finally, once you've got the page proof approved, you approve the book for publication and you're off. Here's a diagram that shows that process. Again, the modified PDF book file and cover file go into the Ingram verification phase. If you need to, you correct the cover and you correct the document and you loop back around again. And finally, once you review and approve it, it goes into the publication process at Ingram Spark. I wanted to talk a minute about pricing. It's a black art. To determine the retail price, you have to consider several things. Ingram Spark's printing costs, which they'll actually tell you. They have good printing cost calculators so that you can make informed decisions about it. The discounts for sellers are expected. Normally, discounts are anywhere between 30 and 55% in the US. Resellers want 55%, but they're willing to accept something as low as 40. So you also have to consider how much profit you want or residual. One of the ways to do that is to consider the value of what you're publishing, as well as pricing for comparable books. So you look at a lot of books on the same subject, you look at what they're charging, and you try to do something similar. You're using that sort of as a guideline for pricing your book too. If it's too cheap, it turns out that fewer people will buy it because it's too cheap and they don't value it. And if it's too expensive, fewer people will buy it because they think it's just too expensive no matter what its value is. So you have to bracket it. And they have a good profit calculator too. When you enter the pricing for the book, they'll actually compute what your profit is for each one. So they have a lot of good online tools. The books are priced per country or region based on the exchange rate and discounts. So they offer standard pricing data for Australia, Canada, the EU countries, the UK, and US. They will sell to other countries as well, and what they do is they use US denominated sales prices with appropriate conversions for doing that. I decided on a no return policy for any of the countries or regions. The liability for a return is too high. In the US, they'll offer to send you the books back. In other countries, your only choice is destruction of the book. In either case, our finances are thin enough for this operation that we really can't afford it. Bookstores will generally stock books that have a no return policy. So the chances of having the book in a physical bookstore are lower, although they will appear in places like Amazon and Barnes and Noble and other places. So once the book is submitted and Ingram Spark is doing their thing, it's time to actually add the book to the website. So what we're going to do is to create a post, add a description, bibliographic information, author information, add the purchase links for the Ingram Spark and vendor websites, add a PDF flipbook preview. I mentioned that earlier. Add a cover as a feature image in order to display it when they're showing summaries. You can actually tag these posts with special tags. And in this case, we created a tag called ICG Press Publications as a category. And by doing that, it shows up in other places, and we don't actually have to do a single thing to make that work. The title automatically, for instance, appears on the ICG Press homepage because it's tagged with ICG Press Publications. That's what we do for each book. The page looks rather like what Amazon would put up in terms of its format. In fact, I blatantly copied that style, which is common for a lot of book vendors. So here's an example of the top part of the page that I created for the Masquerade Handbook. I've embedded the flipbook feature in there, and what it does is it puts the cover image up. But if you select on the book, then it brings up a quick viewer, and you can actually page through the book until you get to the end of the preview, and then it asks you to make a purchase for the book. Here's the bottom half of the page. There are links for ICG Press, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and an educational company called Gloss. There are other places that sell it, obviously, but these are the large ones. Amazon is store per country. There are about a dozen different countries that have separate Amazon stores. So you can select the country from that drop-down list. For Barnes and Noble only sells in the US, and you can order from other places, but it's a US sale. So you can select that. Gloss, there's only an online store for that, and you can select it. Ingram Spark has added something again at the beginning of 2024 when they changed their business model somewhat, where they will actually act as a distributor for your book. So they will actually provide you a page where customers can order the book directly from Ingram Spark, and they will take care of collecting the money, shipping it, putting it into your account, and all of that. The ICG Press option goes to the ICG Press where you can buy it directly. The interesting part about the ICG Press is that all of the other vendors are going to be taking a cut of something like 40%, which is what I set ours to. If you go through the ICG Press, there's a small service fee that Ingram Spark charges for doing it, but it's significantly below what the other ones do. So I'm not actively encouraging people not to go to your favorite book vendor and do that. That wouldn't be fair. But the ICG Press has a lower cost associated with doing that. And as a result, we get a little more back from the sale of a book. So I mentioned the main page of the ICG Press. We're using a standard WordPress features to actually display it. And because I put that tag on the listing for that book, it automatically appeared on the page. And I also created a news item you can see down at the bottom here about it as well. So we have a news channel for the ICG Press that appears on the main page of the ICG website, as well as the main page of the ICG Press. So here's the example of the news release for the Masquerade Handbook. So the question is, what about copyright? I didn't talk about that. Titles are actually born with copyright, and that's been true internationally for some years now. By registering with the US Copyright Office, it provides additional protections in terms of being able to exact punitive as well as actual damages, and being able to recover court costs. You actually have to file within 90 days of publication to register. The cost is about $65 per edition and version. So in the case of the Masquerade Handbook, that would be 3 times $65. And you have to submit 2 copies of each with the registration. So for these initial 3 books, I made the decision not to register based on cost. The chance of us being ripped off is relatively low. We couldn't actually afford to litigate someone stealing the book in any case. So it really wasn't worth the cost of doing that. One idea is to only register books where the benefits outweigh the costs. So the question is, what's next? Now that the startup phase is concluded, we're going to promote the existing titles as much as we can. We want to recruit a selection committee members so that as we get new titles in, we'll be able to run it through the full process and get an evaluation of the content. We want to adopt a formal publication policy so that we can measure whether or not this fits our criteria and what levels of quality we're after, and a lot of things like that. We want to create resource and submission pages for authors for the ICG Press website. We'd like to recruit some editors. This is actually a relatively hard one to do because it requires a bit of experience, and proofreaders for future titles as well. In this case, I was the editor for all 3. Kathy Gust was a proofreader and I was a proofreader, but those were the only 2 proofreaders, and that's not a good situation. It just won't handle the volume, and it's not actually fair to make one person do everything. We want to write some articles about the ICG Press aimed at authors that we can place in various publications as well, including the Virtual Customer, the International Customer newsletter. And finally, we want to solicit new titles. We have an idea for a couple of new ones, but we also want some external authors submitting titles as well. So thank you for your interest in the ICG Press. Please contact me at our email address, icgpress-editor@costum.org, if you have an idea for a costume-related title you'd like to write. If you're interested in being a selection committee member, if you have experience and want to become an editor for a title, and if you want to volunteer as a proofreader for a title. So are there any questions?
Yes, you have a question here, but it might have already been answered. Randall Whitlock is wondering if you've got a press release he can put in Cactus Needle's newsletter.
Absolutely. And after the question and answer session, I'll actually bring up the webpage and I'll show you where it lives. Thanks, Randall.
Why don't you do some demo then?
All right. So this is the ICG Press homepage. Right now, I've got slots for submitting a proposal, evaluating process, frequently asked questions. Those need to be written yet. Here's the recent publications. So as we get more publications, these will be the top 3 or 4 publications that have come out recently. And you can get more publications down here, the full list. This has a short summary of what the publication is. And if I select one of these pages, for instance, let's pick the Masquerade Handbook. So this is the page for the Masquerade Handbook. It has a description. This pretty well mirrors what's on the back cover, which is essentially what Amazon does too. Here are the authors for it. In this case, for the handbook, there was Janet Wilson Anderson, who is the editor and author, and then a number of other authors as well. And you can read about each of them by using this fixture. The product details, and then the page that allows you to go to a particular one. And in this case, you can order the book. So let me click on this one, and you can see it. It actually makes a little sound as I click. I can turn that off with the control down here at the bottom. Just turn it off. So you can see, you can flip through the book. We try to give you a reasonable number of pages. And at that point, that's it for the preview, and we ask you to please purchase the book. So the Masquerade Handbook and the ICG Guidelines are both black and white titles. The Myrtle R. Douglas is a commemorative title. It's based on the talk that I gave at Worldcon in 2016, where we announced the recognition of Myrtle R. Douglas as the mother of convention costuming. And even though it's using the same format and styles, you can see it's a different book. It's an 8x8 format, which is typical of this kind of commemorative. And we're using a higher quality print process and a higher quality paper, 70-pound rather than 50-pound paper. So you can see this one is in color. And I'm using all of the assets from the video for the presentation. And I'm using not a larger font, it's a little more fun for the actual text of what I said. And that's it. This is a shorter book because it's based on a 5-minute presentation, but there's a lot of illustrations involved. And so it's kind of a fun book, and it pays homage to Myrtle Douglas, who started costuming at conventions in 1939. So I really wanted to produce this book. And that's the cover design. I'm particularly happy with this cover design. It turned out really nicely, I thought. So you can dismiss this. And then if you want to, you could go and order it. For instance, here you can order it from, you can order the softcover edition. From Ingram Spark, and there it is. And you can add it to the cart. Or if you want to, you could go to Amazon and buy it there, say Amazon's US store. And it's available there. And you notice it's only hardcover and paperback at this point. We're still getting some thought about what to do about Amazon's contract issues. And Barnes and Noble. And this one is only available in hardcover and paperback as well, because we didn't publish an ebook edition of it. That's pretty much the website. If you go to the press releases, there it is. So the press release is down here. You could read more on this press release. And feel free, Randall, to put all of them in there if you want to. And you can get all of the releases by going to more news.
I don't have any more questions coming in.
Okay. So I'll put back my slides. And thank you very much for coming.
We do have another upcoming webinar next month. We'd like to invite you to join us for that. Costume and textile conservator Cara Varnell will be providing an introduction to conservation and care of costumes in museum collections or on your own vintage and delicate costumes, how to handle them, how to store them, and when it would be a good idea to get a professional conservator involved. She has been a professional conservator for decades and has a lot of experience with textiles and costumes in museums worldwide. If you have visited the Fashion Institute Design and Merchandising Museum in Los Angeles, which is now called ASU FIDM, you may have seen some of her work for that organization. And webinars are always announced in various ways. We email them to Silicon Web and ICG members. We post them as events and notices on Facebook. We publish them in the Virtual Costumer magazine. Information on the upcoming webinars also can be found on the calendar page of the SiW website. The recordings of the past webinars are on the SiW website under the webinars page. And information on joining the Silicon Web chapter of the International Costumers Guild is available on the Join Us page of that same website. Once again, we want to thank you all for coming to this particular webinar, and we hope we will see you again at webinars in the future, especially our next one coming up in April.